up, party people? Skag man, the Lincoln man here. We're back on. This is a no dumb area. Anyway, I'm here today to show you what you can break when you lower your Lincoln. Or you lower any car. These might be good tips. But anyway, we're going to get to it today on Skag's Garage. I'm glad to be back. I'm glad you're back. You stuck around. I love you. Let's get to work. Number one on the list. Well, 1 and 2. The first issue that cropped up with me was I started losing coolant. Dang, why am I losing coolant? And come to find out, my coolant reservoir was cracked. So that's number one, my coolant reservoir was cracked. But because of number 2, my inner fender liner. So when you drop your car, and this is your inner fender liner, and this is your wheel, if you're going for that low look and it pushes up on your inner fender liner, well, mine just happens to be mounted on the fender liner. My inner fender liners are plastic. It's a really hard plastic, so I have a lot of stuff mounted to it. I'll show you. This is my coolant reservoir, and it's hard mounted. It has a built-in stud to bolt into this bracket, and as you can see, I tried to make a repair on this thing already, but when I lower the car, it pushes this fender liner up and it cracked this reservoir. So I have 2 mounting points, one here and one right here. There's actually a stud that goes through that you get the nut through from inside the fender liner where the wheel is. My epoxy repair did not hold, and I'm going to show you where all the coolant was just draining out of that thing. It's not a lot, but it's enough to be embarrassed about if you got coolant pouring out on the ground and people saying, hey man, cool car. You know it's peeing all over the place? I have a solution for that, unless one of you guys have a coolant reservoir for a 70s Continental and you got an extra one and you want to sell it to me. I'll be happy to buy it from you. Direct message me, email me, links in the bio, and we'll work up a deal. I do have one tip though. Maybe if I had have known, but now you'll know because now I know, and since it happened to me, I know, and I can let you know of what you need to do that I didn't do that caused this problem that now I have to fix, so I can let you know what to do, or maybe what to do, so you won't have the same problem that I have. What I would do in the future, had I known, would be I'd loosen these bolts up. I'd loosen this one up and the bolt underneath the fender here to just let it rattle, to just let it move. So when the wheel comes up and impacts the inner fender well, it won't break the mount and cause you to have a leak. Skag tip. Take that. So all you Lincoln guys that's lowering your Lincolns, try that. I wish I had known. Now you know. The more you know. What I have here is a universal coolant reservoir from Dorman. And unlike most parts, it's not made in China, it's made in Taiwan. Close enough. $10 on Amazon. So, it's about 3/4 the size and volume as my original one. However, we'll make it work. So I'm going to pull this one off, get this one replaced, and we'll take care of that issue. So I'll get that done. Yeah, also if you notice here that the actually pull the inner fender away from some of the fasteners, and there's a little crack in the inner fender, but overall it's not too badly damaged, but just to let you know that that's something to look out for when you lower your vehicle. All right, we're underneath the car, and what I'm going to be pointing out to you is stuff that you need to take care of mainly before you lower your car. Anyway, before I lower my car, I had an alignment done. That was like the key thing I wanted to do with the wheels that you're going to be running. However, I also replaced my lower control arm ball joints and my upper control arm ball joints. And these are something that you want to check and make sure that you keep them greased, because if you're going to be running your car up and down, yeah, you don't want these to wear out. I mean, they're going to wear out, but they do actually make heavy duty. Don't get the economy ones, but get the get the heavy duty ball joints. Bump stops. If you look right here, this little chewed up looking bubble gum, that's my lower bump stop. And believe it or not, that thing was brand new when I lowered my car. And the reason for that, I wanted to make sure that, okay, when I dropped it, the lower control arm bump stop rests up here when you lower the car all the way. However, if you ever drive your car with it all the way aired out, you're just going to chew that up, and that's what happened to mine. They do make a urethane version of that, and I think that's what I'm going to get next. But that's something that you need to address as well. If you're curious, this is what it's supposed to look like sitting in here. So when you lower your car, it goes up and it rests there. So rubber, it just broke off. All the way up top is, I don't know if you can see it, but that's your upper control arm bump stop. And so when you have your car aired all the way up, this gives a little cushion between the upper control arm and this spring housing. And so that way you have no metal to metal contact here. And these have lasted, I've had my car lowered down I've had it on air ride for about 7 months. And those are okay. It's just the lower one that's gotten all chewed up. A lot of guys don't run bump stops. I just thought I would. And honestly, with that little chewed up rubber on there, I don't get any kind of clunks or clanks from the front end when I totally air it out. So that little rubber's kind of giving it a cushion, but I think if I were to go back with the rubber ones, what I would do is maybe shave it off so it's not so tall, and maybe when the control arm goes up, it wouldn't bind it and break it off. It would just kind of rest on that part of the rubber. So I might do that. It's only 2 bolts holding the bump stop in. So your call. Your call, Paul. All right, here we are at the hind end of the car. The ass end. Can I say ass on YouTube? Ass. Ass end. And if you notice, one thing that you take into consideration is your rear shocks. Well, your shocks all the way around. I don't have shocks on the front yet because I just haven't done it, and I'm still up in the air on whether or not I'm gonna or where I want to mount them. Anyway, long story short, on your shock absorbers, these are they're not factory shocks, they're replacement shocks, but they're standard replacement shocks for this car. When you lower your car, you have to take in consideration your shock absorbers, because when you lower your car, you're compressing that shock. You don't want to rest your car on where the shock stops. You want your shock to be able to compress farther than where it is that your car sits when your car is fully aired out. On the same note, reverse that. When you air your car all the way up, you don't want to overextend your shock. On any of the old cars like this, when you jack your car up in the air and the axle droops down, what's holding that axle up is your shocks. If you take the shocks loose, the axle will just drop down. But you want a shock that's going to meet your sweet spot. And by that, what I mean is that when you compress that shock all the way, it's going to be shorter than where it is when your suspension is compressed all the way, or when you're at your lowest ride height. And vice versa. When you raise your shock up, when you raise your car up, you don't want it stressing your shock out and trying to pull your shock out of the socket. So, what your man Skag failed to do was to change his shock. And I do have replacement shocks. And what you'll notice right now is that my rear shocks are leaking. You know why? Because when I lower my car, I'm sitting on the shock and not sitting on the bump stop up top. And if you notice, there is a bump stop that your axle should rest on. Now, a lot of guys, to get that low ride height, they'll take the bump stops out. They'll compress these when they lower their car. I mean, the wheel's all the way up in the wheel well. And I don't really care about that. I mean, I think my car looks good as low as I lower it. And it's all personal preference. However, the shocks are not. So if you're running shocks, you need to check your shock length. And if you go on Summit, you can order shocks by extension length and compressed length. So you have to take that measurement and find your sweet spot and find your sweet shock. Another thing that you need to take in consideration is how you route your airlines, because you can't kink them, you can't do a hard bend on them, so they have to loop into wherever you got them to go or need them to go. So if you notice on this one, my airline comes out, is looped around, smooth loop, and it goes into the housing here to the air fitting for this airbag. And it's a perfect loop. And I did that on the other side, on the passenger side, but I ran into a problem. Let me show you. Now, over here on the passenger side, you'll notice my airline takes a little bit of a tighter route around. Then I come around and around the shock and then into where the airbag mount is. This way. And I learned that lesson the hard way, because me and woman Skag, we were out riding one day, and I was like, you know what? It feels like my rear end's sagging. And I'd air it up. My steering wheel was straightened out. And then a little bit later, I feel like I was sagging again. So we pulled over. I got out and I could just hear it hissing. So I actually burned the airline, because at a certain ride height, and with the car going up and down, or with the car bouncing, you know, just normal travel, the airline was getting heated up on the exhaust, right up in here somewhere. And so, had to replace that airline because it had melted a hole through it. Now, this doesn't really, it bothered me at first, but it don't really bother me anymore. But when your axle, when you lower your car, your axle actually moves. I mean, believe it or not, it moves left to right, and we know it moves up and down, but it not only moves up and down, but it actually kind of moves forward when it goes up. And by saying goes up, it's actually when your car comes down over your axle, it shifts. So from underneath, you actually have a lot of clearance between your axle and your exhaust. Yours will be different because all cars are different if you ever had your exhaust system replaced. However, you can see these marks. So when I lower my car, it contacts the exhaust. Now this moves, so it doesn't really bother me that much, but you can hear that little clunk when you air it totally out, because it contacts that on its way up here. And so that's something you just need to take note of. All right, you'll notice right above my head, energy suspension. If you're new to the channel, you need to go back and see where I replace my panhard bar bushings, which is the bushing here. There's actually a polyurethane bushing under there, and the bushing up here. Prior to me even lowering the car, and this was after I first really put it on the road, I got my control arm bushings replaced for the lower control arms, rear and body mount. So if you're going to lower your car, replace your bushings, because you're going to be playing with it, because I play with it. Everybody plays with air suspension. What's the fun of having air suspension if you don't play with it? Replace your bushings. You'll thank me. All right, well, now you know what I know, And you know it sooner if you haven't done your air ride on your car. So you know more than I do or you know more than I did before I did mine. Anyway, I'm just here to help. I'm going to get busy. I got shocks to do, I got a reservoir to do, and I'm going to get to work. I don't know what else y'all doing today, but that's what I'm doing. See you later. Ooh, look how brown that is. Somebody needs a fluid flush.